just waking up each day and knowing that dying to the things that we have here of the world so that he can live through us and speak to us, and we can, the one thing that we have is your testimony, and it's really, and your witness is what you have. And I had fun with these guys. I always have fun. I'm older. I walked to the pond, and that was about as far as I went, about a mile. That was it.
That is really short. I don't know how Jeff was using that. I hadn't been since 2017, and Lenny, who I don't know what Lenny's title is, but from Washington Avenue, asked me to. He's the lead pastor? I didn't know. Okay. Anyway, he asked me to be a small group leader, and but I was hesitant because I'm like but because it said something about how many Christmases do you have until 80, and he's 82, right? Yeah. So I wasn't sure what to do with that one. But it was great. We had, guys opened up very willingly, so that was good. I ended up in a van with, when I was texting Carly, I just called them the boys. So I had Trey and Cougar and Cody and Luke in there. They're all like young enough to be my kids. And they, Brian said something about trying something new every year. They tried everything this year. We did. And one day we went trout fishing and climbed a mountain and played disc golf and played pickleball. They were all over the place. But I will say, from the van ride out all the way back, I was encouraged by those guys because I'm around younger guys at work and other places, and they don't have things together like these guys do. The questions they were asking me on the way there, conversations about, well, what does the Bible say about this? Or, hey, I've heard this. And they're just asking. That's not just then. Like, all the time these guys are asking questions like that. So that was really encouraging to me. And then there was a large number of fathers and sons there. That was really cool to see. And then just, like I said, I hadn't been in a long time, and the connections that you could see between Lakeview guys and Washington Avenue guys. So, like I said, I was a little skeptical going in, but then by the end of it, by the time we were leaving, we were trying to figure out how to be there longer. And apparently Washington Avenue guys had talked about the same thing, and we're on the same page. So anyway, I would encourage any guys who can to go and just be willing to get the most out of it. Paul had an inflatable dead body at the front the whole time, which, if you know Paul, you probably weren't surprised, but I think some of the Washington Avenue guys might have been caught off guard. But anyway, it was great. Gave us some good perspective. Made you think about things, but also just enjoyed some time in the mountains. So.
And one of the questions you wrote was, what do you think when you walked in and saw the dead body? And under the cover, and I had to admit that I thought it was communion. I didn't even know it was. There's a connection there.
Matt and the youngins didn't come up, so that y'all gonna pass. Going once, okay.
I'm not good at talking in front of people, so I'm gonna make this short and sweet. But it was my first time going to a men's retreat, and it was a really good sermon. I gotta agree with Jeff that Paul did a great job. For all the young guys that are kind of coming into adulthood, it's a very good thing. There's a lot to learn coming into manhood, and I think that this is a great way to kind of kick things off. And I'm definitely going to be going back next year, not just for the fun in it, but it's also you really get to see the beauty in creation out in the mountains. So, but yeah, short and sweet. So that was.
Talk to them afterwards. They'll have plenty to say. Head into the Lord's Supper with this, but I just want to do a wrap-up on the retreat. From my perspective, I did have the opportunity to preach. When we started this men's retreat, 13, 14 years ago, before it was right about the time I came here, so about 12 or 13 years ago, I was the key preacher the first 3 years, and then we started bringing in other people and then sharing it and things like that. And then they asked me to do it again this year. I told on to that is memento vivere, which means remember to live, because that's really what remembering to die and that you're going to die is all about. So I preached 4 times, and here I'm just going to give you the title to my sermons and then a closing text to move towards the Lord's Supper. Session number 1, we talked about, and here is the title, You're Really Going to Die. And you really are. And we joked a little bit about that, about the death clock online. We can kind of punch in certain things and find out the date of death. That turned out to be somewhat humorous. I was going to live till I was about 80, but Lenny had said he'd already expired when we did his. But anyway, so I'm not sure what that meant. But just trying to help young and old alike. And I've preached a little bit on this before, but we live in a death-avoidant culture. We don't like to talk about it. We don't like to think about it. We don't like to go to funerals. We don't want to be around hospitals. We don't want to go to nursing homes. We don't want to see, and I mentioned the funeral that we had in town right before we left. I was helping with that with Kendra, and I had a lady in her 70s as I said, you want to go by and pass? I said, don't say pass by the body, it'll freak people out. Say pass by the family, okay? So I said, would you like to pass by the family? And she said, will it be an open casket? And I said, yes. And she just had this horrifying look on her face, and she literally ran out of the sanctuary. She in her 70s. And so then just watching as people went by, and it's not easy, but and so we've become to where we don't even want to talk about it. And I've shared with y'all before, you died at home and prepared you, and people came and visited home now because we took the place of that. But now we've removed all of that from our sight. We don't want to think about it. And folks, that's just not Christian or biblical to avoid it and to avoid the topic. So we spent the first night I'm just trying to convince and allow the Lord to remind and convince us that it doesn't matter whether you avoid it or not, you're going to die. Who's thought that so far has died and has not experienced that. I wouldn't count on that. It will come one day, but you can't count on that being the way you go. And so the second session was you're really going to die, and that's a good thing. Not that certain deaths are good, but the fact that we're mortal is a good thing. And we talked about, really even in Genesis, death entered in after the Adam and Eve ate the fruit, and the death was not so much a punishment as it was the inherent consequence that God already told them was going to happen, and it prevents evil from becoming immortal. And we talked about, well, can you imagine Hitler never dying? Can you imagine those in this world? Evil mortality that God gave us in response to our sin is a mercy, and it's a gift in that sense. And so kind of the theme verse was from Genesis, you are dust or dirt, and to dirt you will return. And so just a reminder of that. It's a good thing also because it's gain. We get to go into glory. But it's also a good thing because the scriptures all over say that it teaches us wisdom. It teaches us to focus in and to zero in on what's really important. It wakes you up when you come face to face with your death or other people's death. So we talked about that for a little bit. Session 3 was you're really going, don't be afraid. And there's lots of reasons for that in different contexts. A lot of times it's because an angel or God shows up and you think you're going to die. But in general, it's still all over that you die. We all die. I'm wondering if there's a connection in the fact that the common experience of humanity is death. And therefore, the most common verse is, because God knows that death will scare us and will freeze us in our tracks, will frighten us and bring us down, that he says, don't be afraid. He knows that death will cause fear. And so my closing verse is in Hebrews chapter 2, It says, therefore, since the children share in blood and flesh, he himself, that is Jesus, also partook of the same. In other words, the incarnation. He became human like us, susceptible to death. I mean, theologians have been trying to for 2,000 years. God himself took on flesh and became susceptible to death. That's why the Greeks and even the Jews rejected it. They just can't fathom that deity would do that. But he did. He took on and became the same, that through death Jesus might render powerless him who had the power of death, that is the devil. In other words, as we say, Jesus destroyed death by death. And that he might free those who through fear of death were subject to slavery, chained all their lives in fear. And that's us. But Jesus died, he really died, and he really rose again, and he defeated death. So therefore the Apostle Paul can struggle in the face of death, as he's honest in his letters, but can also say at the end of the day, for me to live as Christ, to die as gain. And he says, and I don't know which to choose. And you think, well, that's easy. I don't have that issue. I know which to choose. I'll choose to live. Paul says, I don't know which to choose because both of them are good. And he finally makes a decision, says, no, I think I'll live on. You know, and he didn't do it because he was afraid of death. He did it because it meant fruitful labor to bless other people with the gospel. That's why we live. That it might be Christ. And so, the truth of the matter is, according to another verse in Hebrews, that it is appointed unto every person to die once. And after that comes. And are we willing to face life? In just a moment, we're going to take the Lord's Supper. And the verse that I will read, I think it'll be on the screen while we're taking it, but the verse that I will read at the end, nothing but Christ and Him crucified. And the same Savior said, if you want to follow me, you need to be where I am, and where I am is going to the cross. Therefore, take up your own cross, that's death. Die daily, and then follow me. And I think it was the Desert Fathers, but it's an ancient saying, and it says, if you die before you die, then when you die, you won't die. We'll say it one more time. If you die, we are to die to ourselves daily so that when we do physically die, we won't truly die. And as Jesus says, he who believes in me, even though he dies, he won't truly die. And so that's kind of what we focused on. And so as we come to the time of meditation and response, I invite you to prepare to come to take the symbols of death. I mean, look what I have here. I have a cross. That's an instrument of capital punishment, execution, death. We have bread that we will bless that reminds us that there was a body, the very body of God, you might say, was broken for us. And then we have a cup filled with a red juice that's squeezed out of a grape. And that the very blood of Christ was shed for us. Religion. Death is an end. Death is life. And so would you bow your head and close your eyes?